couple of weeks ago, I was driving around Toronto with my wife and two boys, and I got a little bit turned around. I use the GPS a lot, so I was trying to listen to the GPS, and as you probably know, they're not always 100% accurate. So I ended up turning down a road that, took me in the wrong direction, so I had to turn around. Now, I drive around cities, Toronto, New York, I mean, you name it, quite often, so I'm quite comfortable with it. My wife, not as much, obviously. And so my wife says to me, she says, Shawn, are you thinking clearly right now? I mean, are you really thinking about what you're doing? Now, as most of you know, if you know me, my wife is part of the business. I sometimes like to say she's the brains of the operation. But at that moment, I thought about it. I looked at her. I said, yes, of course I am. It's the GPS that's wrong, not me, right? I'm going to blame somebody else. But I thought about that after that statement. Are you thinking clearly? And it struck me that that is a question that I ask a lot of my clients quite often. And let me tell you a little bit more about that. You see, I do a lot of advising and coaching of CEOs. Now, obviously there's some testimonials on my website about that. You don't hear a lot about that because a lot of CEOs have coaches and they don't just raise their hand and say, hey, I'm working with this guy. And of course, everything I do is confidential. I'm not going to share that with you. But all of that said, what I'm often saying to them is, are you thinking clearly? Here's a problem that comes up more time than not, and I want to see if this is a challenge that you've come across. I go to see a client, we sit down, we talk about how they're doing against their objectives, how they're progressing, and they say, well, Shawn, I haven't been able to hit my objective because I've run out of time, I had this employee issue, there's a problem with the board, the customer issues, all this stuff has happened, and it's taken me off track and off the rails, and I haven't hit on my objectives. And I say, okay, fair enough, stuff happens, right? Just like the GPS being wrong, stuff does happen. But here's the problem. Are you here to fix stuff, or are you here to achieve your objectives? Are you thinking clearly? What you need to make sure you do each and every day, and I don't care who you are, CEO, or maybe you're a manager, or maybe you're an employee, it doesn't really matter. You need to be clear on what your objectives are, and you have to be adamant about pursuing those objectives. You have to be crystal clear on what you're doing at that time. Right now, I'm shooting this video, my phone is off, my computer is off, I don't have anything in front of me, I'm speaking to you. I'm solely focused on my objective, which is to create this video. So I want you to think about a few questions I'm going to ask you and reflect on how they impact you in your position, in your organization. Number one, what are your objectives? If you can't tell me within 1 minute what your top 3 or 4 objectives are, you have a problem. Number two, how are you monitoring your progress against those objectives? I mentioned to you before that I advise and coach a lot of CEOs, and part of that is just accountability. Another part is obviously brainstorming and finding solutions, but part of it's just accountability. I've had clients say to me, Shawn, I always catch up on my objectives because when I know you're coming, I know you're going to get upset if I'm not on time. So I scramble in the days before just to make sure I'm up to speed. So the second is, how are you going to measure success and how are you tracking towards those? And the accountability piece is obviously key to that. Last but not least, once you achieve your objective, what's next, right? What if you hit your objective early? Do you just take time off? Well, maybe that's okay. But after you've taken a few days off, what's the next step? You see, setting objectives, both personally, professionally, even strategic objectives, need to be dynamic. They need to change and evolve over time. So you constantly have to reevaluate, is this the right objective for now? Doesn't mean you jump into changing your plan, but it means you reevaluate. So, my question for you, as my wife asked me that one day during our somewhat chaotic drive in Toronto, is, are you thinking clearly? Because if you're not, who is? Thanks for joining me. If you have questions about this video and how I can maybe help you think clearly, feel free to email me, Shawn@casemoreandco.com.